Hello students! Today we are going to be annotating the poem Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by author Robert Frost. Annotation is a fancy word for marking up. So yesterday we went over poetic elements. We did a review video. Today we're going to be dissecting this poem, looking for those poetic elements. Once we've dissected this poem, we're going to take what we see and we're going to mirror it within our own poetry, which we'll be writing. Our own poetry is going to use the same rhyme scheme, the same rhythm, the same syllable counts, the same stanzas and lines as this particular poem. The reason we're using this poem as our mentor text is it's classic American poetry. So classic American poetry usually goes along with themes of nature and self-discovery in nature. So this particular poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, is going to be part of that American tradition. So first let's just read through it. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So this poem is about a guy who's going through the woods with his horse, and he stops to just watch the absolute beauty of the woods filling up with snow, and he's by himself, and his horse is wondering, why are we stopping here? We need to go on. And it's just very mysterious at the end where he says, I have to keep going because I have promises to keep and miles to go. So this is part of the American traditional poetry formatting, which is themes of nature and self-discovery in nature. Okay, so now we're going to annotate our poem together. So what you're going to do is grab your annotation tool. We're going to grab some markers. We're going to do some different coloring here. So let's start with identifying from our poetry lesson yesterday a line. We know a line looks like a sentence in a poem. So this here is our first line. Whose woods these are, I think I know. This is an example of a line in poetry. Similarly, with structure, organizational structure, this here is going to be what we call, as we know from our video, a stanza. And a stanza is a group of lines. So this here is a stanza made of 4 lines. So just looking at our poem in general, we can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4 stanzas in this poem. And each one of these stanzas is made up of 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. So we can put a 4 here, 4, 4. Your poem, when you go to write it, and this will be later on, you are going to have 4 stanzas in your poem, and each of those 4 stanzas is going to consist of 4 lines. Because we are using this as our mentor text and we're modeling after it. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pick up the rhyme scheme. We know that rhyme scheme is formed by looking at the last word on each line and seeing a pattern. So the first thing you do when picking out a rhyme scheme is you look at the last word of the first line. So here we have no. We're going to be labeling rhyme scheme with letters, which is what you do. So every single line that ends with a word that rhymes with no is labeled as an A. That's our first letter in labeling rhyme scheme. So we're looking for words that rhyme with no. No, though, yes, that'll be an A. No, here, well that doesn't rhyme. No, snow, yep, put an A. No, queer, near, lake, year, shake, mistake, sweep, flake, deep, keep, sleep, sleep. Nope. All right, so our A's are going to be line 1, 2, and 4. Okay, the next thing we do when we're looking at rhyme scheme is we look at the next word that was not yet labeled, which is here, and we label that with the next letter of the alphabet, so that's going to be a B. So here is B. So now we're looking for words that rhyme with here. Here, queer? Yes, put a B. Here, near? Yes, put a B. Here, lake? No. Here, year? Put a B. Shake, mistake, sweep, flake, deep, keep, sleep. All right. Next word that's not yet been labeled is lake. Put a C. Now we're looking for words that rhyme with lake. Lake, shake? Yes. Lake, mistake? Lake, sweep? No. Lake, flake? Yes. Deep, keep, sleep? No. All right. Last one is sweep, and we're labeling it D. Sweep, deep? Yes. Sweep, keep, and sweep, sleep. So our rhyme scheme that you are going to be using in your poem to model after this one is A, B, B, C, B, C, C, D, C, D, 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 D. That is our rhyme scheme. So whenever you're creating your own poem, your poem is going to have 4 stanzas made of 4 lines that follow the rhyme scheme A, B, B, C, B, C, C, D, C, D, 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 and D. Okay, next up, what are we noticing about the last 2 lines here? And miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. These lines are repetitious. They repeat. ×2. Your poem that you create is going to end with 2 lines that are the exact same. It will be repetitious. Okay, so we're pulling out all of these different poetic elements here. So while we're here, we're going to create a meter. And meter is created by looking at patterns of syllables. Syllables are, as we know from yesterday's video, the amount of sounds in a word. So you can do this either by putting your hand under your chin and counting how many times your chin hits your hand as you say a word, or you can clap out the syllable count. So let's do the first line together. We're clapping out the line and we're counting how many syllables or sounds are in each word and are in the line. So here we go. Whose woods these are, I think I know. This line has 8 syllables. Let's take a look at the next one. His house is in the village, though. This line also has 8 syllables. He will not see me stopping here. 8. To watch his woods fill up with snow. 8. Our first stanza is made of 4 lines that are each 8 syllables. So your poem is going to have stanza number 1 made of 8 syllable lines. So we are on stanza 2, line 1, and we are counting syllables. So please make sure that you are annotating your copy of Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening as you're watching this. So stanza 2, line 1. My little horse must think it queer. This line has 8 syllables. To stop without a farmhouse near. 8. Now try clapping this along with me. If you want to, you can pause this video and try and go through the rest of it yourself, and then you can check up with it once you're done. Between the woods and frozen lake. 8 syllables. The darkest evening of the year. 8. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, They're probably all 8-syllable lines. Here's the thing, we can't assume that because maybe Robert Frost put a random line in here that's 12 syllables because he really wanted it to be impactful or stand out. Or maybe he ends it with a different syllable count. So we can't just assume that they're all going to be 8 because for stylistic purposes, it is possible that Robert Frost changed it up somewhere here in the poem. So let's continue to stanza 3. He gives his harness bells a shake. 8. To ask if there is some mistake. That's gonna be an 8. The only other sounds the sweep. 8 syllables of easy wind and downy flake. 8. So stanza 3 also has 8 syllables. Again, you're like, maybe they're all 8. It's possible, but we have to check because there might be a special line somewhere in here. Stanza 4, line 1. The woods are lovely, dark and deep. 8. But I have promises to keep. 8. Moment of truth. Is he going to be consistent or is he going to have a crazy show-stopping last 2 lines that are a different syllable count? And miles to go before I sleep. Part of me is disappointed. 8 syllables. They're all 8 syllables. Every single line in your poem that you create next week is going to have 8-syllable lines. My suggestion is if you are needing syllables, you don't have enough syllables, to add adjectives. And if you have too many syllables in your line, then my suggestion is to try enjambment. So we have all of our syllable count done, and this creates, as you can tell, a pattern and a rhythm to it. The fact that this is all consistent with 8 syllables. So now we're going to go in, and while we're on the topic of enjambment, let's go ahead and identify some of that here. So I'm going to change my color of my pencil. Okay. So, enjambment, as you guys saw in the video, this is probably a new term to you this year. As you saw in the video, enjambment is going to be when a thought or an idea flows from the first line into the ones after. It could flow between just 2 lines, it could flow between 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, but whenever the idea is not complete and that thought flows to the next line, that's enjambment. So enjambment is important in poetry because it makes the poem unpredictable and fun to read. If every single line expressed a complete thought and ended with an end stop or a period, it would be very boring to read. You'd be reading it and it would be sentence, 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 sentence. So in order to create some flow in poetry, enjambment breaks that up. So let's take a look in the poem for lines that flow into the next. So my suggestion here is to pause the video. I want you to look for your own examples of enjambment or lines that don't complete the thought and flow into the next, and then come back and resume the video and see how you did. There's lots of right answers here, so I don't want you to think that just because I don't put it on here that you're wrong, but I'm just gonna pull out some that really stand out as being enjambment. So, this one here, my little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. This is one complete thought that flows between 2 lines. So here, queer being strange or weird, using the definition from the late 1800s to early 1900s, this sentence reads, my little horse must think it's really weird that... And then it flows into the next line that we're stopping at this farm without that we're stopping in this area and there's no farmhouse over here. That's strange. So this is an example of enjambment. So I'm gonna color code mine with a square over here because I can't fit that in there. Enjambment, E-N-J-A-M-B-M-E-N-T. Enjambment. flowing from one line into the next. Let's see some other examples. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. This is a complete thought and it flows between two lines here. The only sound I'm hearing is flowing into the next line, wind and snow. And you're like, oh, okay. The thought is now complete. You could have some other answers here. You could have that he gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. That thought flows into the next line. There are quite a few here. So that is where I'm going to identify my enjambment, but feel free to add on and mark this up as much as you can, because that's the beauty of annotation, is that we could be here for hours and hours marking this up. Okay, let's do some figurative language. So I'm going to change my pen color again, do some lime green. So figurative language, we have tons of different types of figurative language that we could look for. So again, I would suggest pausing the video, going through, trying to identify some examples of figurative language, and then you can play the video and see if yours match up. If they don't, that's okay. I'm sure that you're gonna find a lot in here. I'm just going to label a few as an example. Okay, so one thing that really stands out to me that Robert Frost likes doing is occasionally throwing in pairs of words that show alliteration. So dark and deep. Both of these words are close to one another in the line and they have the repetition of the letter D. This is an example of alliteration. Alliteration. Okay. Similarly, we have sounds, the sweep, sounds, sweep. Again, we have alliteration there. I'm going to draw an arrow for both of these. Okay, and then here's another example. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there, I'm going to erase this so we can read it, to ask if there is some mistake. This here goes up here with this. The horse is asking if there's a mistake. So what do we know is a type of figurative language where we're giving human-like qualities to animals or objects. This is going to be an example of personification. Okay, so these are some examples of figurative language in here. Going along with figurative language, and it kind of like is a subcategory here, we have something called imagery. And imagery is when you have words or phrases that help to create an image in the reader's mind, a picture in the reader's mind. So usually the sensory detail of sight, descriptive words, talking about how something appears is going to help to create imagery. So let's take a look at specific words that were chosen by the author to create an image in the mind. We know that specific words chosen for a specific purpose is called diction. That's one of our words that we learned from our Poetic Elements video. We also know that strings of words and how they're put together to create an effect is called syntax. Syntax. So we're looking for diction and syntax here that help create images or pictures in a reader's mind. So pause the video, take a look at some different areas within the poem that are very descriptive with the sensory detail of sight, and label those, come back and see if I have any that are different than yours. So right off the bat, I would say watching the woods fill up with snow is a very specific sensory imagery. So we can picture that in our minds. We know what it looks like when woods are filling up with snow. It's a beautiful sight. This is descriptive language. So this would be an example of Robert Frost using diction, word choice, and syntax, how he's arranging those words to create an example of the sensory detail imagery. Let's take a look. Woods are lovely, dark, and deep. That's a description that appeals to how something looks. So that would be another example of imagery. There are more examples here, so you could have a few more if you want to, but I'm going to now roll into, since we're talking about it, some sensory details. There's one more sensory detail in here that really stands out, and that's going to be a sound. So harness spells a shake. That's going to be sensory language, and that's how something sounds. Sensory language. Oops, I didn't label the other one. Let's go back. And that other piece was an example of imagery. Okay, we're doing great. So one last thing that I do want to identify in here is going to be symbolism, a symbol. A symbol is an object, a thing, that represents something greater than itself. So when an author is using a symbol, he or she is using that object literally. It is actually that thing, that object is in the poem, is in the piece of literature. However, there's also a deeper meaning to it too, something that could really be discussed and analyzed. So I'm going to have you take a look through the poem and see if you can find an object or a setting or an individual, an animal, something that you feel might represent something greater than itself, and identify that. Come back and see if mine's different than yours or is similar to yours. Okay, I'm going to say, and again, I'm going to have to erase some things so we can see. Woods, the woods here. So let's think about this. Our narrator is on a mission. He has promises to keep. He is doing some task for someone. So instead of going straight to his task and doing whatever it is that he promised he would do, he goes off course and he stands in the woods and he is admiring the beauty of the woods filling up with snow. So what do you think that might represent to him if he's using that as a way to kind of get away from the promise that he made to someone instead of meeting that promise? For me, I would say that the woods, they symbolize an escape. He's using this as kind of like a sanctuary, this beautiful area, to kind of take a pause from the promises that he's kept and to not quite fulfill those promises, but basically to escape, to enjoy something for himself. So I would say the woods would be an example of a symbol. If you found something else in here that you feel represents something greater than itself, then label that on your poem and explain what you feel you think that thing means, that object means. Okay, so yours might look different than mine, but it should be completely annotated. So your poem should have color-coded text all over it that is dissecting our model text, our classic American poem, for the different poetic elements. So now that we've looked at this and we have a model, we're going to use it to mirror our own poem after. So we're going to take the elements of this and we are going to construct something new on a topic that is now culturally relevant, modernizing this poem. So you will be turning this in. You're not turning it in quite yet because there's a step 2 to this before you submit it. And the step 2 is, scrolling down to the next page, crafting your own poem. So within this page here, and I've already done it, so you can go in and annotate yours a little bit. You're going to be crafting a poem of your own that has 4 stanzas, and each of those 4 stanzas is going to have 4 lines. Your rhyme scheme we're going to write on the left-hand side so that it's a reminder. Your rhyme scheme is going to be AABA, BBCB, CCDC, D, 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 and D. The last 2 lines of your poem are going to be repetitious. They're going to be the exact same. So go ahead and put your rhyme scheme on the left-hand side. On the top of your poem, I would put an 8, a giant 8. This is to remind you that all of your lines in your poem are going to be 8 syllables long. And I gave you some tips to try and count the syllables in your line. If you're working on that and you need extra assistance, I will be here to help you. You can either, if it's a virtual day, join the Zoom from 3:05 to 3:20 and I can answer any questions and help you count it out. Or if we're in person, obviously we'll do it together. Somewhere on this graphic organizer for creating your own poem, I also want you to put a note that we should be including somewhere in there an example of figurative language. That could literally be any type of figurative language. It could be sensory detail, it could be alliteration, it could be a simile or a metaphor or an onomatopoeia. Also, I want you to have one example at least, you could have more, but one example at least of enjambment. So enjambment is when your thought rolls into the next line. And then I also want you to keep in mind imagery, creating an image in the reader's mind. So breaking this down, you guys are going to chunk it. Monday is going to be your day to brainstorm ideas and to create a mind map of words to work with. On Tuesday, you're going to craft the first stanza of your poem. It'll be 4 lines following the rhyme scheme AABA, and each line will be 8 syllables long. Wednesday, you'll craft stanza 2, consisting of 4 lines following the rhyme scheme BBCB, and all have 8 syllables. And then Thursday, you'll finish your poem crafting stanzas 3 and 4, since stanza 4 is going to be extremely repetitious, with the last 2 lines being the exact same. So for Thursday, your work will follow C, C, D, C, D, 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 and D as your rhyme scheme, and all of the syllables will be 8 syllables. When you're done crafting your poem, you're going to double check all of the rhyme scheme and the lines, making sure the lines are 8 syllables long. And then you will be typing out a final draft of your poem, which we'll be putting into our portfolios. Then, when your poem is finalized and it's typed up and it's ready to go, you'll be creating a video, multimedia, that goes along with it. So stay tuned for all of those other pieces. And for today, we're going to save this and we'll revisit it on Monday.